This is Crystal Project. Sometimes as soon as you start a game, you know it's going to be something special, and this was one of those times for me because I tend to love class-based, like Final Fantasy-esque JRPGs an awful lot, and this is exactly one of those. And in fact, superficially, it might remind you of something like, say, Final Fantasy V, with its focus on developing various job paths and things, but a lot of the specifics kind of tell a bit of a different story, and it actually really reminds me of something like a single-player Final Fantasy XI by way of Bravely Default, as strange as that may sound. But there's a lot of minutiae, a lot of mechanics and things about this game that really remind me a lot of Final Fantasy XI over something like FF5, despite the fact that this sort of job system is often more associated with that game. It's going for the whole non-linear JRPG thing, which means that you're sort of dumped into a world and you have quite an open path before you as far as where you can choose to go next. And really, the main point of the game is pretty simple. Find crystals. That's it. Just find the crystals. And the open world of the game is the first thing to really talk about because it's done extremely well. This is one of those things that reminds me of FF11 a little bit. It is one large contiguous open world. All of the dungeons and everything are all entered and exited without loading screens, and the whole thing is just one big adventure without any breaks, which is super cool. And you'll be really impressed with how well the world interconnects with itself and how some of the areas will be revealed to be nearer to other areas than you at first thought. And it all just goes together to create this really nice sense of a cohesive adventure in this rapidly unfolding, very large world. And at first, I was kind of put off by the lack of fast travel in this game because there's a lot of platforming in this game, a huge amount of platforming, in fact, and some very precise jumps in some areas as well, especially in the later game dungeons, although I will say that the platforming controls are very good, so it doesn't feel floaty or imprecise, and the platforming is actually not as hard as it might look once you actually get your hands on it, because the controls work well for this sort of thing. But anyway, the fact that you have to platform around a lot of the world means that at first it will seem a little bit tedious to actually get around it because it's large, there's a lot of places to go, and since it's very non-linear, there are a lot of different directions that you could go in first. You're not really told to go to one specific place before any other place, you just sort of adventure and see what you find. However, once I actually came to grips with the game and started to unlock its various systems of quicker travel and stuff, I really started to understand why it's structured the way that it is, and I have a really good appreciation for this style of world design, and this is one of those things that reminds me of FF11, because you have to understand how the world's zones interconnect to get around it as efficiently as possible, and combining that with the limited versions of fast travel that you do get, things like home points, which are crystals that work exactly like home points in Final Fantasy XI. They allow you to respawn and teleport to that specific point, but you can only have one home point at a time. You'll eventually get a home point stone that is an infinite use teleport object that allows you to go back to wherever your home point is. You can also find various stones related to different temples around the world, these shrines, and these stones will allow unlimited teleports to that specific part of the map, just like how the Crag teleport spells in FF11 actually worked. So you do have a limited form of fast travel, but you still have to memorize the way the world interconnects to more efficiently explore it, and you will also be unlocking various mounts, and this is sort of the Metroidvania aspect of the world. Different mounts will allow you to access different parts of the world you couldn't before. There's a mount that lets you jump farther, one that lets you jump higher, one that lets you glide, and one that lets you swim. So this allows you to organically open up more possibilities of exploration in the world without the game specifically telling you, hey, go here now. And the whole thing kind of feels, like the very first time you played Dark Souls 1, how you were kind of begging at first for a way to travel between bonfires very quickly, but then you realized how the world interconnected and how important it was to unlock new lifts and unlock gates and doors and stuff to get various shortcuts back to Firelink, and it all culminated in eventually getting the Lord Vessel and getting a sort of limited way to warp to certain areas, and it was all really cool how the world unfolded and made you memorize its various connections, and how fast travel from the beginning of that game would have totally ruined that sense of exploration. It would have sort of taken it all away. This is what this game feels like. This means that exploration is very heavily rewarded because you are given a very large world, and then it is gated off by various things you cannot yet reach until you get a specific mount that then allows you to actually traverse those new areas. So you always have a pretty large sandbox with multiple different directions to go, and once you've gone enough of those directions, you will get a new sort of tier of the sandbox as you are now able to access even more of it than before. Every time you find a crystal, sometimes they will be at the end of dungeons, sometimes they'll be in hard-to-reach places, sometimes they'll have bosses before them, sometimes they won't. It just sort of depends on the area, but whenever you find a new crystal, you will unlock a new job. You will have a team of 4 characters that you can actually make right from the beginning and name all of them yourself, which is pretty cool, and you can choose their first starting jobs from the traditional Final Fantasy VI, although the Red Mage is renamed to Warlock in this case. And fighting monsters will of course get you experience and money, as well as job points, LP in this case. And as you get more job points, you can then go into each individual job's skill tree and unlock new abilities in that tree. These range from new spells for magic using jobs to new attacks and stuff for more physical jobs, and new stances and other various activatable abilities, as well as new passive things that you can equip on anyone. And once you learn a passive, you can equip that passive on that character no matter what their job actually is. So you can have passives from the ninja and the Valkyrie and the warrior together if you want to, all making whatever job you're currently using more powerful. You just have a 10-point limit, and each passive takes a different number of those points to equip. You also have a secondary skill choice, so you can have the various skills that whatever job you're equipped with actually has access to, and then one other set that you've previously learned from any other job. So you can basically have like a job and a sub-job, more or less. And you're of course meant to combine this main job, the sub-job, and all the various accessories and weapons and armors that you can equip to make a very powerful character meant to do specific things. And one thing I really like about how this game goes about all of this is it gives you a ton of information. Like, nothing is hidden from you in this game in terms of stats and stuff like that. Everything is given to you, even the damage formulas for every individual spell and skill, they're all laid out for you if you want to look at them. When you target an enemy with a spell or something, it'll tell you your exact percentage chance to hit, as well as how much damage it'll do minus any variance. If it's a physical attack that can critical hit, it'll also give you your exact percentage chance to crit, and exactly how much damage a crit will do, as well as any debuff information that needs to be shown. So it shows you every little bit of information that you need to know, and if you hover over a particular ability, it'll even tell you the damage formula for it. It'll say, like, the base power is 400 times 0.5 of your spirit and all that stuff. It just tells you all this information, and it's very useful so that you always know how to build your character and what sorts of numbers you need to be increasing if you want to get stronger. The job change screen also shows the exact stat growths of every single stat if you change to that job, which is super cool. All jobs, by the way, also have at least one passive that's active as long as you have that job equipped, as sometimes they even have two, depending on the job. And the only thing that I would say that could be changed about this is it would be nice if it showed you that character's exact stats and what those stats would change into if they changed into the job that you're currently selecting. It would be nice to have that information on there as well, next to the different job growth stats. This means that combat in this game is a very varied affair that is quite fun, because everyone will have two different jobs worth of skills that they can pull from, and of course everyone is customized with various passives and traits and weapons and all sorts of stuff, so you have a very colorful party that has a lot of different capabilities at once. And the various different jobs are actually the highlight of the game for me personally, because some of them are really interesting. You have your standard, your standbys like your monk, your warrior, your knight, your mages of various kinds and things of that nature, but you've also got some more exotic stuff like the scholar, which is a blue mage, and I'm always a fan of blue mages in games. You have the Weaver, which is your meta magic style class, that sort of like a scholar from Final Fantasy XI. It allows you to alter like single target spells to be multi-target and things of that nature. It's very powerful. You've also got stuff like the Summoner, which is always fun. This is another Final Fantasy XI-like thing, because it's best supported by either like pure black or pure white magic, and it requires you to venture across the world and fight the various summons and best them in order to actually be able to summon them. The Beatmaster is kind of funny. It's actually like a staff/spear using class that relies on like musical repetition and stuff to do more and more damage, but it's also a support class. The Valkyrie is like a sort of supporty off-tank class that's really fun. The Ninja is of course your evasion tank. The Samurai is another Final Fantasy XI style class, because it is mostly based on using powerful skills that build up combo points on your enemy, and then using a different skill that will consume those combo points for extra damage. And it makes me think that it might be inspired by the FF11 Samurais, which are mostly about using special attacks called weapon skills in quick succession and creating something called a skill chain for a big burst of damage at the end, something that was unique to Samurai because although everyone could do it, it normally required multiple players to work together, but Samurai were able to do it by themselves. One thing that JRPGs often have a problem with, that in my opinion this game actually solves, is money. Oftentimes in JRPGs, about halfway through the game or so, you end up with so much money that it will never be a problem ever again. Because most of the best gear you can get is either gotten from boss kills, or stolen from rare enemies, or found in dungeons and treasure chests. And you don't buy that much gear aside from in the early game when that kind of stuff is useful in a lot of these games. So by the time you get to the mid-game and on, you're just swimming in money with nothing to spend it on. But in this game, stuff is actually quite expensive, and money works on a kind of exponential curve, you could say. How it seems to work is that when you arrive at a new town, just like in all JRPGs, the first thing you do is go to the weapon and magic stores to see what shiny new stuff they've got. But in this case, the new town that you're at will be very expensive compared to the kind of money that you've been making before now. And you won't really be able to afford much of those stores yet. However, by the time you get to the next town, you'll be making a lot more money, and that previous town will now be a lot more affordable, and the next town will be the one that you got to work towards. So basically, it seems that the various spacing of how much things cost in each town is spaced out in such a way that you always have something to work for. You always have new gear to work towards, and it means that your money never feels useless or superfluous, like you just have so much of it and nothing to spend it on. Instead, you actually have quite a few different things to spend it on, and it's all quite expensive, so you really need to save up to get really good gear. And although you do find gear in treasure chests and things, a lot of really good stuff is bought. So there's actually a big point in buying consumables and in buying various weapons and armors to outfit your classes, and of course to have some extras if you want to change to other classes at different points. Maybe you need like a spear in your pocket for something later, and all that sort of stuff. So I like the fact that it gives you things to work towards, and it makes it to where money actually has value instead of just being this thing that you continually accrue but don't spend. If I did have one complaint about the game, it would be that sometimes the balance is a little bit weird, and not to the point where it ruins the experience or anything that significant, but there are some things that, in my opinion, are oddly balanced. And mostly it comes down to two major factors that individually aren't a big problem, but together they combine to make a bit of a problem. One is that enemies have extremely high damage in this game. Even my tankiest character that spent the entire game leveling various tank professions is still able to get two-shot, just like everyone else, by some of the hardest enemies that I'm able to fight right now. So it doesn't really seem to make much of a difference that they're wearing heavy armor and they have much more developed tanky stats. They still die just as fast as everyone else, even my squishy mages. Now, this isn't in itself a problem because you have all kinds of debuffs that you can inflict on the enemy and all kinds of buffs that you can inflict on yourselves to help change this. So there's a lot of tactical choice in terms of creating a combination of various jobs in your party to deal with situations like these. That's the point. Except the other problem is that enemies get a lot of turns in this game. It is turn-based, and enemies get a lot of turns, and they don't have very long cooldowns on those turns. So when you're dealing with things like casting times and casting cooldowns on your characters, it means that for every time that, say, your black mage gets to act, an enemy might get to act 2 or 3 times. And what this means is that in some areas, the balance kind of takes a bit of a back seat, and instead of being about interesting tactical battles with all these buffs and debuffs and stuff, it just becomes about damage. Just how much damage can you pile onto the enemy, nuke them before they nuke you, just do damage as much as possible as fast as you can, and any more nuanced strategy kind of goes out the window in certain areas because of this high damage and high speed of enemies. This makes certain jobs a lot weaker than in my opinion they should be, like for instance the ninja, who focuses on elemental attacks that debuff the elemental resistance of enemies. So if you hit them with Ice Seal, they'll take a bunch of extra ice damage and all that sort of stuff, except these only last for 1 turn. So by the time that any of your other party members that's not a super fast ninja, like say a mage that can cast elemental spells to capitalize on this, actually gets their turn and then gets to cast, the enemy will have already had 1 or 2 turns and the debuff will have worn off, long ago. So you'll never actually be able to capitalize on it. And all the time that you spent setting up that combo was just sort of a waste of time because now the enemy is doing tons of damage to you in the meantime and you're not able to capitalize on this combo you were trying to do, so you were better off just doing pure burst damage all the time. This isn't a problem throughout the entire game. I'm not trying to say that the balance of the game is just totally screwed or anything like that. It's not that severe, but there are some areas in particular where enemies just pile on huge amounts of damage very, very fast, and it feels like the game gives you a lot of tactical tools that make the combat very fun and interesting most of the time, but in these certain areas it just becomes about piling on pure burst damage as much as possible. But aside from the occasional balance hiccup with how enemy turn timers and stuff work, it is a really extremely solid game. The boss fights are fun, the dungeons are varied and have a lot of platforming and combat challenges in them. There's all sorts of secret loot and optional stuff all over the place. This is a huge game and it's only $14. That is an absolute steal in my opinion. You're probably getting at least 30 or 40 hours out of this game in one playthrough because of all the optional stuff, all the other jobs you can get, all the optional bosses to face, and the extra post-game challenges and stuff. There's a ton of stuff here, and every time you get out of one of the dungeons, you'll be surprised at how it interconnects with the rest of the world and how much else there still is to find and how the game just keeps going with new content. There's a ton of content in this game to experience, and it's an absolute joy to play, honestly. I really, really enjoy these job-focused JRPGs, and this does it extremely well. Also, the story isn't super present, but it is pretty funny at times without actually trying too hard to be funny. And the game's overall non-linear structure means that there's a lot of different approaches that you can take in terms of building your own party and creating a really fun adventure for yourself. And that's really what the game is about. The game is about making your own adventure and doing it your way. And it is very challenging. It's on the harder end of this style of JRPG, in my opinion, but the challenge feels fair for the most part. The boss fights are memorably complex in terms of having good mechanics that make you think and maybe mess with your party composition a little bit without needing to be cheesed because they're so artificially difficult or anything like that. So yeah, that is Crystal Project. I highly recommend this game if you're at all a fan of JRPGs or things like Bravely Default, if you've just never played very many but you only know of certain games. If you like this idea of gathering classes and changing classes in your party to create a sort of battle formation, this game is for you. It does that really well, and its structure makes it a blast to explore. So I will link you below in the description of this video to the Steam store page if you want to check it out. Again, only $14. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.